It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. 1997 is the beginning of a very interesting chapter in heavy metal. One of the most legendary bands in the history of heavy metal returns from the dead. A really big year for a neglected subgenre. And finally, one of the top 10 songs of all time comes out this year. Find out all about it next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of the Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we're going to talk about the year 1997. This is a really interesting chapter in the history of heavy metal. And as I said in the opener, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Well, why is it the worst of times? Let's start there. This is a few years after the record industry and all of society decided metal had to go. If you go back just a few years ago, Metallica was on the top of the charts. Heavy metal was everywhere. And then one day, the radio stations, the record executives, everybody, MTV, everybody decided no more heavy metal. So now heavy metal has gone underground. Pretty bad. For those of us who lived through this and were used to having easy access to metal, it was a bad time. But it also represented an opportunity. It was the best of times because now there was no record labels telling bands, hey, let's put out a commercial hit. Let's do a cover of an old song. Let's do this. Let's do that. Heavy metal bands were beginning to be able to make music they wanted to make. So there was a lot of freedom going on. And, whenever you get an underground movement, even though it's not maybe popular commercially, you see a lot of great artistic work coming out that that might have been suffocated in an earlier decade. So one of the legendary new wave of British heavy metal bands returns to form. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the show, but just know when we get there, this was a band that was at the absolute top of their game. Got moved to a record label that wanted to make them into a hit machine and completely ruined their music for over a decade. But they're back and they're free to make metal again, and they're going to put out one of the best albums of the year. Also, because now we have all this freedom and because we do have this underground, we're going to talk a little bit about an underrated subgenre, at least on my channel, power metal. This is one of the biggest years in the history of power metal. We're going to talk about it just a little bit. And finally, stay tuned for the best songs of the year, because in this year, in my humble opinion, one of the top 10 heavy metal songs of all time. So before we get into the top 10 albums, before we get into the top 10 songs, even before we get into who the Grammys thought were the best 5 acts of the year, let's talk just for a second about the unbelievable year in power metal. With traditional heavy metal no longer dominating the scene, what you're starting to see in the 90s is a lot of subgenres that will spring up and start to carve a niche into the metal community. One such subgenre is power metal. Now, if you are a fan of the channel, you know I am always going to put traditional heavy metal at the top of my list. Thrash metal, love thrash metal. Love melodic death metal. The list goes on, and you have to go a little bit into a few things before you start running into power metal. Not one of my favorite genres. I like power metal. I think one of the forefathers of power metal, Manowar, one of my favorite bands of all time. So it's not that I don't like power metal, it's just never going to be at the top of my list. So therefore, it kind of gets neglected when you're only talking about top 5 albums, top 5 songs of the year. But this year in particular was so amazing for power metal. I think you had at least 3 bands put out classic power metal albums. Many people credit the band Hammerfall and their album Glory to the Brave as one of the big moments in power metal that kind of launched 1,000 ships, if you will. But you also have probably my favorite power metal album this year comes out of Symphony X, Divine Wings of Tragedy. If you haven't heard either of these albums, check it out. You also had one of the veterans of the genre, Stradivarius, come out with a very great album called Visions. You had other bands come out, Gamma Ray, the list goes on and on. Really big year for power metal. So if you love power metal, please go back in time to 1997. Check out Hammerfall, check out Symphony X, check out Stradivarius. You'll be glad you did. Some really good stuff. Now, I think a kissing cousin to the power metal movement is the symphonic metal movement. There's a lot of similarities. So when I find people that like power metal, they also seem to have a taste for symphonic metal. And two of the biggest symphonic metal bands in the history of heavy metal have their debuts in 1997. Nightwish with their album Angels Fall First, and Within Temptation with their album Enter. So not only do you have three groundbreaking power metal albums, you have a couple of the biggest bands in the history of symphonic metal all coming out into 1997. Go check it out. Now, it's a very competitive year, and none of these bands are going to make it into the top 5 songs or albums. But I think all of these albums deserve a lot of credit. Speaking of top 5 albums and songs, let's start off with what the Grammys considered the top 5 heavy metal performances of 1997. All right, if you're familiar with the Grammy format, they have this kind of vague, nebulous category called Best Heavy Metal Performance, and it can have songs or albums going against one another. Never made much sense to me. What we do is we take the best albums of the year and the best songs of the year, and we have 2 separate categories. That's the way it should be. But this year, well, and most years, it's not a big deal, because most years the Grammys are going to put 5 songs in there and call it a day. But this year, they actually have 4 songs on an album. So we'll go through the 4 songs first, and then we'll go to the album. The 4 songs they nominated that year. First nominee, Megadeth, with their song Trust. If I'm doing my math correctly, this is like the 7th nomination for Megadeth. Congratulations. The Grammys love themselves some Megadeth. I love the song Trust, but I think there's one better song off the album Cryptic Writings. We're going to talk about that when we talk about our top 5 songs of the year. The second nominee, Korn, with the song No Place to Hide. If you've watched my show, you know, not a fan of this kind of new metal, not a fan of Korn, don't think this is a deserving nomination. The third nomination, Corrosion of Conformity, with their song Drowning in a Daydream. If you watched our 1996 show, you will know that I think Corrosion of Conformity put out one of the best albums of the year, Wise Blood, and it had a slew of really good songs on it, amongst them Drowning in a Daydream. So while this should have been nominated in 1996, in my opinion, I'm just glad to see Corrosion of Conformity getting a little bit of credit. And if you haven't watched the 1996 Grammy special, go do so. It's really good, and you'll find out just how great Corrosion of Conformity is, one of the undiscovered gems in heavy metal. The fourth nominee, Pantera, with the live version of Cemetery Gates. I'm not really a big fan of including live tracks in the Grammys. I prefer to look for artists that are putting out new music in that year. And so I wouldn't go to this song as a nominee, but I will say Cemetery Gates, one of the absolute best. On any given day, might even be my favorite Pantera song, for sure in my top 3. So if you're going to take a live track from Pantera, why not make it Cemetery Gates? An unbelievably good song. And finally, the fifth nominee and the eventual winner of the Grammy Awards for Best Heavy Metal Performance, the album from Tool, Enema. Again, it's a year later than it should be. I think this is the absolute best Tool album. Many people agree with that. Many really classic songs on this. But if I'm choosing from these 5, I guess I'm going to go back to my bias towards Corrosion of Conformity. They put out some ridiculously good stuff in the 90s. The whole point of Corrosion of Conformity was they changed their style to metal right at the time metal kind of became persona non grata in the music world. I think if Corrosion would have come out just a little bit earlier, they would have been huge. So some interesting nominations. If you've watched the show, you know I get a little annoyed because it seems like the Grammys are always like a year later. They're talking about, stuff from like 1996. Corrosion of Conformity and Tool were both produced back in 1996. They love their cover songs. They love their live tracks. But there's, other than Korn, I like all of the nominees this year. Some really good stuff by the Grammys, surprisingly. But I think we can do better. And we're going to do it in a better way. So let's go through the top 5 songs of 1997. "1997 was a fantastic year in heavy metal, and it was really difficult to narrow this list down to just 5 songs. But I think we pulled it off. Let's see if you agree. Our first nominee, Deftones, with their song "My Own Summer, Shove It." I think this was the big breakthrough hit for Deftones. This is the song that kind of launched them into stardom. This is a really good song. I love a song with lots of attitude, and this one's dripping with it. I just got through talking about Korn. I am not a nu metal fan, and yes, that kind of is contradictory. At this point, Deftones is considered a nu metal artist, but I never really lumped them into that really rappy. There's a few songs on here that are a little bit too rappy for me, but for the most part, that alternative shoegazy style is starting to move to the forefront, and the riffs on this are fantastic. Our second nominee comes from In Flames, "Dialogue with the Stars." I think this is instrumental perfection. This song is brilliant, and it really shows off just the technical chops of In Flames. They have put out an album this year called Horacle that has a number of great songs on it. But this instrumental, I just never can get over it. It is one of the all-time best. Our third nominee, Judas Priest, with their song "Cathedral Spires." Listen, it's hard to get around this. This is the first album Judas Priest has put out without Rob Halford. And I am a huge fan of Judas Priest and Rob Halford. But this song is one of my all-time favorite Judas Priest songs. This, if I was to put together a top 10 Judas Priest songs list, this one would make it. It is by far the best song of the Ripper Owens era. Of course, he is the person who is the lead singer right now for Judas Priest. It has one of the coolest intros in all of metal. Really talking about despair. I love it when they basically break into, "We're never going to see another setting sun. Time to rise up and ascend. The end has come." Very doomy, and then it just breaks into these heavy riffs. There are a lot of good songs on the album Jugulator, and it's kind of been hidden for whatever reason. Judas Priest kind of doesn't acknowledge it now. Go find it. It is terrific. Our fourth nominee, we talked about it a little bit ago, the best song off Cryptic Writings, Megadeth, with the song "She-Wolf." It's kind of interesting that Metallica and Megadeth are kind of in the same boat for me. I'm not really into new Metallica music. They come out with Load and Reload and all that through this era. And Megadeth is just okay through this era. Not a big fan of Cryptic Writings. I do like the song the Grammys nominated, and I do like this song. But it's not consistently good like their earlier stuff. But when they hit great. She-Wolf is a ripper. And finally, our fifth nominee, Rammstein, with their song "Du Hast." This is one of those songs that the first time I heard it, I still remember thinking, what is this? There is not anything from this era that's more unique than Rammstein, with their very kind of marching cadences, their electronic synths in the background, and these great riffs. Du Hast, an all-time classic. So once again, let's talk about the 5 nominees. My Own Summer, Shove It, Deftones. Dialogue with Stars, In Flames. Cathedral Spires, Judas Priest. She-Wolf, Megadeth. And Du Hast, Rammstein. And the winner is... Drum roll, please. Because not only do I think this is the best song of 1997, but this is, in my humble opinion, one of the top heavy metal songs of all time. Du Hast, Rammstein. I still remember the first time I heard this song. That in and of itself will tell you what a great song it is. When you can remember, I remember where I was when I first heard this song. I had never heard of Rammstein before. This is probably their second album. And I was just like, whoever this is, whatever this is tremendous. I think that if you take that kind of marching, heavy cadence, that catchiness, those riffs, one of the top 10 songs of all time, I will go as far to say, listen, if you don't agree that this is a top 10 heavy metal song, that's always going to be debatable. There's so many great songs to choose from. But I think, without any controversy, this is the greatest non-English heavy metal song of all time. Hands down. For a band, at a time when heavy metal was in like time out, no one wanted to hear about heavy metal, for a band to come out with a song not sang in English and become a huge hit, that's all you need to know about how tremendous this song was. I didn't think a song at that time, it's a little bit different now, but at that time, a non-English song getting on the charts, becoming a big hit, unheard of, preposterous. That's how good a song this is. And let me just say, poor Cathedral Spires. Any other year, I cannot tell you how much I love Cathedral Spires. Once again, Jugulator, buried in the sands of heavy metal. Halford, for whatever reason, doesn't want it out. Judas Priest doesn't want it out. Whatever. Go check out Jugulator. There are several good songs. The best of them, Cathedral Spires. So congratulations to Rammstein and their unbelievable song. Song of the year. Song of the decade. Du Hast. Let's see how everybody fares in the top 5 heavy metal albums of 1997. Our first nominee, Bruce Dickinson, Accident of Birth. I said this a couple of years ago. I'll say it again. When Bruce Dickinson left Iron Maiden, I pretty much thought, well, sayonara, Bruce Dickinson, I'll be a Maiden guy. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Iron Maiden's okay through this stretch without Bruce, but Bruce is just doing some amazing work. This is also marks the return of one of my favorite guitarists, Adrian Smith. Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith really start to just completely blow everything away. This album's great. If you just want to say, Bruce Dickinson, I don't know if I've ever heard his solo stuff, go to this album, go to the song Omega. Fantastic. Our second nominee, Dark Tranquillity with The Mind's Eye. We talked about it earlier. I love my traditional heavy metal. I love my thrash metal. But I've got a sweet spot for that Swedish melodic death metal. And right now, Dark Tranquillity, they're putting out banger after banger. I don't think they quite get enough credit as being the founders of this music, but don't sleep on them. This album is great. Once again, if you want to hear a really good song, Heat On is very good. Hedon, not sure I'm saying it right. If you want something kind of different, I didn't really like it at first, but man, it just was one of those songs that just grows on me. Insanity's Crescendo, really good and different type of song, really has an epic feel. Our third nominee, In Flames with the album Horacle. We talked about the fact that melodic death metal, this is really when it's starting, and it's really good at this point. Just some of the most pioneering, fantastic albums you're going to hear. We talked a little bit about Dialogue with the Stars, probably one of my favorite instrumentals of all time. Just comes out of blue on this album, but everything In Flames is doing right now is like gold. Really good stuff. Our fourth nominee, and I'm going to try to say this, Sehnsucht by Rammstein. We got through talking about just the fact that Du Hast is on this album. I see people kind of joke about Rammstein. They're like, yes, this is the album that has Du Hast on it. But there are some other really good songs. Don't sleep on this early era of Rammstein. They've got a song on there, again, pardon me for the pronunciations, Engel, E-N-G-E-L. Just another tremendous. This album is just start to finish. Maybe fades a little bit towards the end, but the first part of this album is just one banger after another banger after another banger. Our fifth and final nominee, we're going to talk about this band, Saxon. Unleash the Beast. Talked about him in my opener if you were wondering who I was referring to. Saxon had a number of great albums in the 80s. As we sit here in the year 2026, we all know how big Iron Maiden was, is, has always been. Saxon was going toe-to-toe with them, album after album. Got themselves in a record label, tried to go commercial, tried to become Def Leppard, and put out some real stinkers for a decade. But they're back with Unleash the Beast, and it's a good one. So our 5 nominees for Best Heavy Metal Album of 1997, Bruce Dickinson, Accident of Birth. Dark Tranquillity, The Mind's Eye. In Flames, Horacle. Rammstein with Sehnsucht. And finally, the new wave of British heavy metal heavyweight Saxon with Unleash the Beast. And the winner is Saxon, Unleash the Beast. What a return to form. If you go back to the early 80s, Iron Maiden and Saxon are kind of the two heavyweights in the new wave of British heavy metal. Sure, Def Leppard is as well, but Def Leppard goes commercial so quickly. It's hard to really think of them in that vein anymore, right? Saxon and Iron Maiden, man, those are the two pillars. So if you go through those early 80s, Iron Maiden's got like Killers, Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind. Saxon has Denim and Leather, Strong Arm of the Law, Power and the Glory. I saw Iron Maiden and Saxon. Iron Maiden was on their Peace of Mind tour. Saxon was on their Power and the Glory tour. Listen, I'm not trying to say Saxon was better than Iron Maiden, but they were their equal. They were both big heavyweights. But while Iron Maiden went on to do Power Slave and Seventh Son and, a slew of great albums after that, Saxon got on a record label that wanted to turn them into Def Leppard. Can you make an album like Pyromania? And so Saxon tried, and Saxon failed. And they go into the abyss. They're not good at all. I've completely written them off. And I don't even really know how they kind of immediately got back on my radar. I think I heard the title track, Unleash the Beast, which is my favorite track on this album, by the way. And I went, wait a minute. That sounds like Saxon should sound. What happened? Went out, got the album, got the CD, and just the whole thing is sensational. And I would say from this point forward, Saxon is free from the shackles of the record labels. They're just making good heavy metal music. And while they kind of lost a lot of momentum, I would say, what are we, in 1997? So for the last 30 years now, Saxon has been putting out very consistent, good heavy metal music. So if you were like me and got disgusted with Saxon and said, enough, right? After Crusader was barely hanging in there, but then they put out, Innocence is No Excuse, and it just got worse and worse, folks. It was awful. If you left Saxon never to return, here's the tip of the day. Go back to 1997. Go pull up Unleash the Beast. Enjoy it. It's sensational. And then move forward through their catalog, because pretty much everything from this point on is good to great. Saxon, glad to have you back in the heavy metal world. We missed you. This was really great. And quite frankly, it took a Herculean Saxon album's return to beat out Bruce Dickinson, who's also putting out. Him and Adrian Smith together. Ooh, if you missed the Bruce Dickinson era when he was doing solo work, start right here. I think with Accident of Birth, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. So once again, congratulations to Rammstein with their Song of the Year, Du Hast, and Saxon for their triumphant return, Unleash the Beast. Now let's go see what the Grammys were doing in some other categories of interest. So one of the closely tied categories to heavy metal is the best hard rock performance. If you're ever going to see a heavy metal band nominated in a different category, it's right here with hard rock. This year, the Grammys gave the award to the Smashing Pumpkins. Now, we talked about this a little bit with Metallica and some other bands. U2 is another great example of this, where they kind of ignore a band through the height of their popularity and creativity, and then all of a sudden the Grammys latch on to them after the fact. In 1997, the Smashing Pumpkins have kind of gone, they've hit their peak and they're starting to fade. They're going to break up here in a minute. Don't really think Smashing Pumpkins were deserving in 1997. So I'll give you a couple of who I think were deserving back in this day. I think this is the era of Collective Soul. I think they're putting out fantastic music. Devin Townsend shows up. His very first album, sensational. The Foo Fighters have now showed up. They are putting out really good stuff. But my choice here might be my favorite Offspring song, Gone Away. Again, all of those I would have put in before I would have gone with Smashing Pumpkins. But it gets worse, because the best album of the year that year went to Bob Dylan. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever seen the movie Weekend at Bernie's, this is to me what describes the Bob Dylan 90s era. Bob Dylan cannot put together a decent album to save his tuchus at this point. He can't sing. He's kind of mumbling and slurring, and it would almost be like visiting Bob Dylan at the drunk tank. Just what do you think about that? Well, all right, whatever. The Grammys are obsessed with the past while ignoring the present and clearly ignoring the future. Let me just give you a band to maybe think about for best album of the year. How about Radiohead, right? I'm not even talking metal here. I've given up on heavy metal ever winning album of the year. If Metallica couldn't do it, poor old Judas Priest or Bruce Dickinson or Rammstein, none of those guys have a chance, right? But if you look at it from just good rock and roll, Radiohead is the biggest band in the 90s. They went with Bob Dylan. You know who else got a nominee? Sir Paul McCartney. I'm not going to trash on the Beatles too much. Everybody says they're the greatest band of all time. Fine. I'll even concede that point. But there is nothing Paul McCartney did of interest after the Beatles. Nothing. Wings was maybe mediocre. But come on, guys. It's 1997. Bob Dylan should be in a retirement home. Paul McCartney should be, doing whatever royalty does. And they can put out music. I have no problem with it. It's just shouldn't be being nominated for Grammys. Come on, people. But it gets worse. Best song of the year is a song called Sonny Came Home by someone by the name of Sean Colvin. So now, if it's not bad enough that they're dragging poor Bob Dylan out, we're getting kind of this late 90s, they're kind of getting back into folk music again. Because again, the hippies are sitting around going, cool, man, some good old folk music. I have never been a fan of folk music, so maybe this is a little bit of a biased take. But folk music should have been out, buried in the sandbox, in the kitty litter, back in the 60s. It has no place in the 90s. We've moved on, people. This is a horrible song. God bless you, Sean Colvin. Bye-bye. No, this is cheesy, corny. Don't like it at all. And along those lines, newcomer of the year, Paula Cole. Hanson. I don't know. To me, these are terrible nominations. Hanson was if Hanson was around today, they would be a meme joke. I'm just saying. Terrible, poppy, syrupy kind of nonsense. And finally, instrumental of the year. The only reason I bring it up is I just got through telling you. In Flames puts together one of the most sensational instrumentals I've ever heard. Because not only Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, they're still around, but this is really like my cup of tea. It's not just flashy guitars. It's really a great song as well. Best instrumental of the year has to go to In Flames. They gave it to a band called the Chemical Brothers. The Grammys are out to lunch. These are terrible picks. It's almost to the point where I can just ditch this whole segment because these people, no one's heard of Sean Colvin. No one's heard of Paula Cole. No one cares about Hanson. These are terrible choices. You know, at least if you go back to the 60s and 70s when the Grammys still cared about music, they were like, you know, Stevie Wonder. Yeah, he was pretty good. Now they're just trying to grasp for anything that sounds like the 60s in the late 90s. Terrible choices, Grammys. Shame on you. Once again, you've got great... We talked about this at the beginning of the show. You want to talk about newcomers? We never even get a sniff at Newcomer of the Year. You've got two of the most phenomenal symphonic metal bands of all time. Nightwish, anybody? Come on. And quite frankly, Rammstein, even though this is their second album, I looked this Paula Cole person up. This was their second album, too. So while I don't understand how they were nominated, let alone win the category, Rammstein put them in there. So, but once again, the Grammys stink. They're ignoring really good metal. They, along with everybody else, is just buried heavy metal. But you know what I love about 1997? Traditional heavy metal, we were told it's dead. And yet, Judas Priest puts out a phenomenal album, Jugulator. Saxon puts out Unleash the Beast, album of the year. Narrowly beaten out Bruce Dickinson. Three of the big heavyweights of 1980s traditional metal said, screw you, screw trying to bury heavy metal. We're going to put out 3 albums that cannot be ignored. Along with some of the great new bands that are coming out, 1997 ended up being great regardless of all the conspiracies, all the pressure, all the people telling you that heavy metal is dead. It's never been more alive. 1997, a great year. Go back and enjoy this year. It was phenomenal. And that's our program. We do this every week. We're going through the entire history of heavy metal. We are going through year by year to tell you what was the best heavy metal of the year. So, here in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about 1998. You don't want to miss it. So subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell. Feed the YouTube algorithm. And we'll catch you back here next Tuesday. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.